The sky stretched wide and restless over Hollow Creek Ranch, painted in bruised shades of violet and gray as the last light sank behind the jagged hills. The wind came first, low and lonely, carrying the smell of dust and rain. Then the silence followed, thick, heavy, the kind that settles deep inside the bones of a man who's been alone too long. Elias Turner stood by the corral fence, his calloused hands resting on the worn wood, his eyes tracing the fading horizon. The cattle were already tucked in the barn, their shadows shifting faintly in the dim lantern glow. The evening should have been quiet, like every other night. But something in the air felt different, the kind of stillness that waits before a storm. He adjusted his hat, feeling the weight of another day press against his shoulders. 58 years old, tall, lean, with lines cut deep into his sun-worn face, Elias had the look of a man carved by time and grief. His life was all dust, labor, and memory now. The house behind him, 2 rooms and a porch that creaked under the wind, was filled only with echoes. The ghost of laughter that used to live there had long since faded. He could still remember the smell of his wife's hair, the soft sound of their daughter's giggle when she ran barefoot through the tall grass. Both gone, lost in a fire that swallowed half the ranch and everything that made it home. That was 15 years ago. Since then, he had spoken more to the horses than to people. He didn't mind. The world outside was cruel and loud, and he had made his peace with silence. But peace is a fragile thing on the frontier. Thunder rolled across the open land, deep and distant at first, then closer, rumbling like the growl of an angry god. The wind picked up, whipping through the grass, scattering loose straw across the yard. The first drops of rain splattered against the porch steps as Elias closed the barn door tight. He lit a small lantern and started back toward the house, the dim light flickering against the storm's breath. He had just reached the porch when the sky opened up. Rain came down in hard, slanted sheets, drumming against the roof like the beat of war drums. He hung his coat on the wall, sat by the fireplace, and poured himself a small drink of rye whiskey. The flames hissed and snapped, filling the room with orange warmth. It was just another storm. It would pass like everything else. Then, 3 knocks. Hard, sharp, desperate. Elias froze. The sound didn't belong. No one came this far out after dark, especially not in a storm. He waited, the rain pounding outside, the knocks coming again, faster this time. His heart thudded once, hard in his chest. He stood, lantern in hand, and walked to the door. When he opened it, the wind slammed into him like a wave. And there, framed in the rain, stood a boy, no more than 6 or 7 years old, drenched from head to toe, shivering so hard his teeth chattered. "Lord Almighty," Elias muttered, lowering the lantern to see better. What in blazes? The boy's lips moved, trembling. His voice was small, thin, and broken by sobs. They beaten my mama." His eyes lifted, wide with terror. "She's dying." Elias's breath caught. "What did you say, son?" The boy swallowed, his voice cracking. "They hurt her. I don't know if she's breathing anymore." He was shaking so violently that Elias didn't even think. He just reached out and pulled the boy inside, shutting the door against the wind. The child's skin was ice cold, his clothes stuck to his small frame, his dark hair plastered to his face. Elias grabbed a blanket from the chair and wrapped it around him. "Where's your mama, boy? Who done this to her?" Elias's voice came out rougher than he meant it to. The boy's chest hitched with sobs. "Down the road, by the creek. I ran all the way here. Please, mister, please help her." Elias stared at him, torn between instinct and fear. He hadn't gone near town in months, hadn't spoken to a soul in weeks. The world outside his fence line wasn't his concern anymore. But the sight of the child, the pleading eyes, the small shaking hands clutching at the blanket, cracked something inside him, something he'd buried long ago. He set the lantern on the table, grabbed his coat and hat again. "You stay here," he said. "I'll ride." The boy grabbed his sleeve. "No, you don't know where." I have to show you." Elias hesitated, jaw tight. The storm was getting worse, the thunder closer now, the rain beating harder against the windows. But he couldn't ignore the boy's desperation. "Fine," he muttered. "Get your boots, son. We'll go together." The boy nodded, wiping his tears with the back of his sleeve. Elias took another lantern, lit it bright, and stepped out into the storm. The wind nearly tore the hat from his head. Mud splashed under his boots as the two of them moved quickly through the yard, past the barn, down the narrow trail that led to the creek. "Keep close!" Elias shouted over the rain. The boy nodded, his small figure darting ahead, his feet slipping in the mud but never stopping. The lantern light swung wildly in Elias's hand, casting gold flashes on the trees and the rain-soaked earth. The trail twisted down toward the riverbed, where the sound of rushing water mixed with the storm's fury. Lightning cracked across the sky, lighting the world in white for an instant, and that's when Elias saw it. The broken wagon, half sunken in the mud, one wheel shattered, its contents scattered across the ground. And beside it, motionless, lay a woman. The boy ran ahead, crying out, "Mama!" Elias's boots sank deep into the mud as he hurried forward, kneeling beside her. The lantern light flickered across her face, pale, bruised, blood at the corner of her lip. Her clothes were torn, soaked through, her long black hair tangled and streaked with mud. She looked fragile, almost unreal under the stormlight. "She ain't dead," Elias murmured, pressing two fingers to her neck. A faint pulse. Weak, but there. She's alive. The boy let out a trembling sob of relief, clutching her hand. "Mama, wake up." Elias looked around. The wagon bore marks of struggle, broken crates, boot prints, and a torn shawl half buried in the dirt. He could guess what happened. Drifters, thieves. The kind of men who took what they wanted and left ruin behind. He knew the type all too well. "All right, son," he said, keeping his voice steady. "We can't stay out here. She needs warmth. I'll carry her. You keep hold of that lantern." The boy nodded fiercely, holding the light as Elias lifted the woman carefully into his arms. She was light, frighteningly so. Her head fell against his shoulder, her breath shallow and ragged. He started back up the trail, every step heavy through the thick, sucking mud. The rain blurred the world to gray and shadow. Thunder cracked overhead. The boy stumbled but kept moving, the lantern's flame flickering wildly, their only guide through the dark. Elias's heart pounded, not just from the climb, but from the old ache that had awoken inside him. He hadn't carried anyone like this since his wife. That night. That fire. The memory burned at the edges of his mind, but he pushed it back. They reached the house nearly half an hour later, both soaked and shivering. Elias kicked the door open, laid the woman gently on the couch near the fire, and threw more wood into the flames until the room glowed with heat. "Get me that blanket over there," he told the boy. The child obeyed instantly, wrapping it around his mother's body. Elias checked her wounds, bruises along her ribs, a gash on her arm, dried blood on her temple. None of it looked fatal, but she was weak, starved, and beaten near senseless. He found a bottle of clean water, dampened a cloth, and began wiping the mud and blood from her face. Her skin was smooth beneath the grime, her features delicate, high cheekbones, almond eyes that flickered faintly as she stirred. She whispered something, soft, foreign, like the wind brushing through reeds. Elias leaned closer. "Easy now, you're safe here." Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused at first, then finding his face. Fear flashed across them, quick and sharp. She tried to speak, but her voice broke into a cough. "Don't try to talk," Elias said gently. "You're hurt. Rest." The boy crawled up beside her, clutching her hand. "Mama, it's okay. He helped us. We're safe." Her gaze moved from her son to Elias again. For a moment, neither spoke. The storm still raged outside, thunder echoing across the plains. But inside the cabin, something else filled the silence, something fragile and alive. Elias turned away, busying himself with boiling water and tearing an old sheet into bandages. The rhythm of care came naturally, his hands steady despite the tremor in his chest. He cleaned her wounds, wrapped them carefully, and covered her with an extra blanket. The boy refused to leave her side, holding her fingers tightly. When it was done, Elias sat back in his chair, the fire casting gold light across his tired face. He poured the boy a mug of warm milk, set it beside him, then leaned back, exhaling slowly. "What's your name, son?" he asked. The boy blinked, wiping his nose. "Luca." "All right, Luca. You done good tonight. You got her here alive. That's brave." Luca nodded, eyes red and heavy with exhaustion. "Mama, her name is Mei Lin," he murmured, before sleep took him right there on the rug beside her. Elias watched him for a long while, the small chest rising and falling steadily, the woman's breathing still shallow but stronger than before. Outside, the storm began to ease. The thunder rolled farther away, the rain softening into a whisper. He stood and walked to the window. The land stretched out dark and endless, lit only by the faint moonlight breaking through the clouds. Somewhere beyond those hills lay the men who did this. He knew their kind, the ones who saw difference as sin, who filled their emptiness with cruelty. He'd seen enough of them to last a lifetime. He closed the curtains and returned to the fire. The woman shifted slightly in her sleep, a faint sound escaping her lips. He didn't understand the words, but the tone, the tremor of pain and fear, needed no translation. He pulled an extra blanket from the shelf and draped it over her, careful not to wake her. Then he sat down again, staring into the fire, letting its warmth seep into his old bones. He told himself he'd take them to town in the morning. Let the doctor look at her, maybe send word to the sheriff. That was the sensible thing. But as he sat there, watching the faint rise and fall of her chest, something in him resisted the idea. Town folks weren't kind to outsiders, especially not to someone like her. The whispers, the judgment, it'd break her all over again. He sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. "What the hell are you doing, Elias?" he muttered under his breath. "You swore you were done with people." But the firelight danced across her face, and he saw something in her even now, something unbroken, something brave. A woman who had fought to stay alive long enough to get her son to safety. That kind of will. He respected that. Hours passed. The storm finally died, leaving behind the faint chirp of crickets and the soft drip of water from the eaves. The boy slept curled beside the couch, his small hand still holding his mother's. Elias sat in his chair, eyes heavy, but he couldn't look away from them. It had been years since his home had held more than one heartbeat. Now there were three. The fire burned low, throwing gentle shadows across the room. The lantern's flame flickered, then steadied, casting a warm glow over the woman's face. For the first time in 15 years, Elias Turner felt something he'd forgotten the shape of: hope. He leaned back in his chair, whispering softly to the darkness, "Rest easy, miss. You're safe now." Outside, the wind carried the scent of rain-washed earth and wild sage. The land breathed again, and somewhere far off, a coyote called into the night. Elias closed his eyes, the rhythm of the fire and the faint sound of their breathing lulling him into sleep. For the first time in a long, lonely lifetime, the old ranch no longer felt empty. It felt like a beginning. The storm had passed, leaving Hollow Creek washed clean beneath the pale blush of dawn. The ranch glistened with dew, the scent of wet earth and smoke lingering in the air. A thin mist curled over the pasture, and the faint hum of cicadas stirred from the grass. Inside the cabin, the silence was soft, almost tender, broken only by the slow crackle of dying embers in the fireplace. Elias Turner woke before the sun, as he always did. Habit. The body of a rancher never forgot the rhythm of dawn. He stretched his stiff shoulders, joints popping, and glanced toward the couch. The boy still slept on the rug, wrapped in the blanket, his small face relaxed now, his mother's hand still resting loosely over his. The woman had stirred once or twice through the night, murmuring in a language Elias didn't understand, but she'd finally fallen into deep sleep near midnight. He rose quietly, his boots creaking against the floorboards, and poured a cup of coffee from the pot that had sat cooling on the stove. The bitter scent filled the room. Outside, a rooster crowed. The world was waking up again. He stepped out to the porch, the mug warm between his hands, and watched the sun climb slow and gold over the hills. The light touched the land like forgiveness, stretching long across the wet grass. It had been a long time since he'd watched dawn with anything but weariness. But this morning felt different, like the earth had shifted, if only slightly. He turned back toward the cabin, listening for movement. The woman would need tending. He didn't even know her full story, or how far she'd come, but it was clear she'd been through hell. That thought sat heavy in his chest as he returned inside. Mei Lin was awake when he entered, though weak and pale. Her dark eyes followed him warily as he set the coffee down. She looked disoriented, her gaze flitting from the window to the small table, to the boy asleep by her side, then back to Elias. She tried to sit up, but winced sharply, pressing a hand to her ribs. "Easy," he said, setting his hat aside. "You're safe here." She blinked, the faintest crease between her brows, as though she struggled to understand. He realized her English might be limited. He spoke slower, softer. "You, safe, rest." Her lips parted slightly, and her voice came, faint but melodic, her accent delicate. "You help us?" Elias nodded once. "Found you down by the creek. You were half dead. Lucky the boy got to me." Her gaze softened as she turned toward Luca, still curled under the blanket. She brushed a strand of hair from his forehead, whispering something that sounded like a prayer. Elias looked away, feeling like he'd intruded on something sacred. "I'll fix you something to eat," he muttered, moving toward the kitchen corner. "You need food in you." She didn't answer, but her eyes followed him, cautious, uncertain, yet not afraid. He cracked eggs into the pan, the sound sharp in the quiet room, and the smell of sizzling butter soon mingled with the faint smoke from the fire. When he handed her a plate, she hesitated, bowing her head slightly before taking it. She ate slowly, carefully, as if unused to being treated gently. Luca woke midway through, rubbing his eyes, then dove eagerly into his share. Watching the two of them eat, Elias felt a strange warmth stir in his chest. It had been years since anyone had shared his table. When they finished, Mei Lin murmured something that sounded like thanks, pressing her palms together briefly. Elias only nodded, unsure how to respond. Later that morning, after seeing to the horses, he returned to find her standing by the window, staring out at the land. She leaned lightly on the frame, the blanket still around her shoulders, her long hair falling loose. The light caught her face, softening the bruises. She turned slightly when she sensed him behind her. "You live alone?" she asked, her words careful but clear. He nodded. 15 years now. Her brow furrowed faintly. "Your family?" "Gone," he said simply. He didn't offer more, didn't need to. The silence after told her enough. She bowed her head slightly, a quiet gesture of sympathy. "I'm sorry." Elias looked out the window beside her. The plain stretched endlessly toward the horizon, open and merciless. "World's cruel sometimes," he said, "but it keeps turning." She studied him for a moment longer, then looked back outside, her voice a whisper. "Yes, but sometimes kindness still live." The words hung in the air between them, gentle yet powerful. He didn't know how to answer that. Over the next few days, the rhythm of life shifted in small but steady ways. The woman and her boy became part of the house, like the sound of wind through the shutters or the scent of coffee in the morning. Elias caught himself listening for their voices without meaning to. Mei Lin moved carefully, still sore from her wounds, but she began to help in quiet ways, sweeping the floor, tending the fire, washing the dishes with slow, practiced grace. She spoke little, but her presence filled the spaces that had once been hollow. Luca followed Elias everywhere. The boy's curiosity was endless. He asked about horses, cattle, tools, even the stars at night. He trailed behind him like a shadow, small boots stomping through the dust, his laughter ringing through the ranch. Elias pretended to grumble but found himself smiling more than he had in years. At night, after the boy had fallen asleep, Elias and Mei Lin would sometimes share the firelight in silence. She'd sit with her sewing, repairing her torn clothes with steady fingers, while he smoked quietly, staring into the flames. It was strange how easy the silence became, how it felt less like emptiness and more like peace. One evening she broke it softly. "You no go to town?" He shook his head. "Ain't much there for me." She tilted her head. "People there not kind?" "Some are," he said after a moment. "Some ain't. Folk around here don't take well to strangers." She gave a small, knowing smile. "I see." Her eyes fell back to her sewing, but the sadness that crossed her face didn't escape him. She'd felt that cruelty firsthand. He wondered what kind of life she'd run from, what had driven her this far west with a child, and no protection. When he asked, gently one night, she hesitated long before answering. "My husband gone. Work in mine. They say Rockfall." She paused, her hands stilling on the fabric. "No money. No home. I come find work, clean house, cook. Men say they help. They lie." Elias said nothing, but his jaw tightened. He understood too well what men were capable of when no one was watching. "After," she continued, voice barely above a whisper, "we walk many days. I think maybe we die. But she glanced toward Luca, asleep on the floor beside them. "He keep say, Mama, one day good man help us." She smiled faintly then, tired but real. "And he right." Elias felt something catch in his throat. He turned his gaze to the fire. "Ain't no hero here, ma'am. Just a man who didn't shut the door." "Sometimes," she said softly. "That is enough." The days bled into one another, calm and slow. The bruises on her skin faded, replaced by color. She began to walk outside, helping with small chores, feeding the chickens, hanging laundry beneath the open sky. She wore one of Elias's old shirts tied at the waist, and when the wind caught her hair, he had to look away. Something about her quiet strength unsettled him, stirred memories of a time he thought he'd buried. One afternoon, as they worked near the barn, Luca ran laughing after a stray chicken, tripped, and fell into the mud. He sat there blinking, shocked for a moment, then burst into laughter. Mei Lin laughed too, light and musical, and Elias couldn't help but join in. The sound echoed across the yard like sunlight after rain. Later that evening, while brushing down the horses, Elias caught sight of Mei Lin standing by the fence, the boy perched on the rail beside her. The sunset painted the sky in orange and gold, their silhouettes framed against the light. She looked peaceful, smiling as the wind lifted her hair. Something in the sight twisted deep inside him, a feeling he hadn't allowed himself in years. Longing. That night, when the boy was asleep, she approached him by the fire. "You work too hard," she said gently. He smirked faintly. "Comes with the land." She hesitated, then reached into her satchel and pulled out a small pouch of herbs. "For your hands," she said, gesturing to the cracked skin. "Make soft." He accepted it awkwardly. "You don't have to." She shook her head. "I want." He met her gaze, and for a heartbeat, the air between them shifted, charged, unspoken. He looked away first, muttering a thank you. She smiled quietly, then returned to her place by the fire, humming a soft tune in her native tongue. The melody was unfamiliar, but something about it ached sweetly in his chest. The following morning, Elias rode into town for supplies, leaving them alone for the first time. As he approached the general store, he felt the weight of eyes on him. Two men near the hitching post whispered something under their breath. He caught only fragments. That Chinawoman, old fool, ruining himself. His jaw tightened, but he said nothing. He'd expected this. Word traveled fast in small places. Inside, the storekeeper hesitated before serving him, forcing a polite smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Heard you been taken in some company out there," the man said. Elias's tone was flat. "Don't recall that being your concern." The man coughed. "Just saying. Folks talk, you know. Not everyone's fond of, well, her kind." Elias set his money down hard enough to rattle the counter. "Folks can talk all they want. I ain't asking. Permission?" He left without another word. The ride home felt longer, the weight of judgment heavy on his shoulders. When he reached the ranch, Luca came running to greet him, waving a stick like a sword, and the sight eased the tension in his chest. That night, as they ate dinner, he didn't mention town. But Mei Lin must have seen the shadow in his eyes. After the meal, when the boy was asleep, she said quietly, "They not want me here?" Elias stared at the fire. "They don't know you. Fear makes fools of people. She nodded slowly, her expression calm, though her eyes shimmered faintly. I learn long time. People fear what not same. He wanted to say something, anything, but words felt clumsy in his mouth. Instead, he reached over and placed a hand lightly on hers. You and the boy got a place here. Don't matter what they say. She looked at their hands, then up at him. Thank you. Her voice was soft, almost trembling. In the days that followed, something began to change between them. Small things. The way her eyes lingered when he smiled. The way he found himself listening for her footsteps in the morning. They didn't speak of it. Didn't need to. The feeling lived quietly between them, growing like wild grass after rain. One night, a sudden noise outside jolted them both awake, a faint creak near the barn. Elias grabbed his rifle, stepping out into the cold. The moon hung full and white above the plains. He saw nothing but shadows. Still, he felt it, eyes watching from the dark. When he returned, Mei Lin was standing by the doorway, her son clinging to her leg. Fear flickered across her face. He lowered the rifle slowly. Just coyotes? He lied. But deep down, he wasn't sure. That night, sleep didn't come easy. He sat by the fire long after they'd gone back to bed, the rifle across his knees, staring into the embers. The world outside felt close again, pressing in around the fragile peace they'd built. When the dawn came, pale and silent, he looked at the woman sleeping on the couch, the boy curled beside her, and made a quiet promise to himself. Whatever was coming, whoever was out there, he'd protect them. Because somewhere between that first knock on his door and this morning's light, Hollow Creek was no longer just his home. It was theirs. The sun was still low when Elias rode into Hollow Creek. The morning air was sharp, the sky stretching pale and cloudless above the ridges. His horse's hooves drummed against the packed dirt road, echoing through the quiet streets of the small frontier town. He had come only for supplies, maybe a few nails and a sack of feed, but already he could feel it, the shift in how people looked at him. Eyes that used to nod with quiet respect now lingered too long. Conversation slowed as he passed. He dismounted outside the general store and tied his horse. The wind carried the faint rattle of the saloon doors and the creak of a distant signboard. A couple of men leaned against a post near the blacksmith's, talking low. Elias caught his name whispered between them, then laughter that wasn't kind. He ignored it. Years of solitude had taught him which words were worth fighting and which were dust. Inside the store, the air smelled of flour and tobacco. Tom Braddock, the storekeeper, gave him a thin smile. "Mornin', Elias," he said, drawing out the words. "How's the ranch these days?" "Quiet," Elias replied, setting a list on the counter. "Feed, nails, and lamp oil." Tom's eyes flicked to the list, then back up. "Heard tell you've got company out there. Foreign woman and a kid." His voice carried a little too loud, meant for the others browsing nearby to hear. "That true?" Elias's gaze lifted, steady and cold. "Don't see how that's your concern, Tom." Tom shrugged, all false innocence. "Ain't judging. Just that folks are talking. Ain't common, you know, a man like you taking in someone like her." Elias's hand tightened around the counter's edge. "You gonna fill that order? Or you gonna keep flapping your mouth?" Tom blinked, the color draining slightly from his face. "Sure thing," he muttered, turning away. The scrape of the scoop in the grain bin filled the tense silence. When Elias stepped back out into the street with his supplies, the stares followed him. A woman across the road whispered something to her friend and turned away quickly when he met her eyes. He could almost hear their thoughts, their fears dressed up as righteousness. He swung into the saddle, jaw tight, and rode out of town without looking back. By the time he reached the ranch, the sky had turned silver blue, the air thick with heat. Mei Lin was outside hanging laundry, her sleeves rolled to her elbows, hair pinned loosely at the nape of her neck. The sight of her stopped him for a moment. The wind lifted the sheets behind her, white sails against the endless prairie. Luca was nearby, chasing a chicken with a stick and laughing so hard he could barely breathe. Elias dismounted slowly. Mei Lin turned when she heard him, a soft smile lighting her bruises. "You come back early," she said, wiping her hands. He nodded, unloading the supplies. Didn't feel like staying in town. Her smile faded, reading the weight in his tone. They talk, she said quietly. It wasn't a question. He hesitated. Word travels faster than a dust storm in that place. She looked away, her eyes shadowed. I make trouble for you. You didn't, he said firmly. They just don't understand. Her fingers twisted in the damp cloth she held. In my home, people say same thing, she whispered. If women walk alone, she bad. If she poor, she shame. Always they find reason. Elias looked at her then, really looked, and for a heartbeat the world fell silent. You ain't got anything to be ashamed of, he said. His voice came out rough, unpolished. Don't let 'em make you forget that. She met his eyes, and something flickered there, fragile but fierce. You kind, Mr. Turner. But kindness make enemies too. He couldn't argue with that. Days passed, and the whispers grew louder. It started with stares at the market, then with a few men from town who rode out near the ranch just to see. Elias caught sight of them once, sitting on their horses beyond the fence line, watching. When he rode out to confront them, they tipped their hats and laughed, riding off into the hills. That evening, he found Mei Lin kneeling by the small garden she'd started near the porch, pulling weeds. The light was soft, brushing her face in gold. You shouldn't be out here alone, he said. Not today. She looked up at him, the corners of her lips lifting faintly. If I hide, they win. He didn't have an answer for that either. The next morning, he rode into town again for mail. This time, the sheriff stopped him outside the saloon. Sheriff Harlan was a tall man with a silver badge dulled by dust and a face carved from suspicion. Heard there's been some talk, he said, spitting into the dirt. You know how folks are, Elias. They see something they don't like, they get restless. Elias adjusted his hat. Let him get restless. Ain't breaking any law-keeping company. Maybe not, Harlan said slowly. But there's men around here who don't care about laws much. The Briggs boy's been sniffing around again. Elias's jaw tightened. Them drifters that came through last month? The sheriff nodded. Same ones. Don't want no trouble out on your land, you hear? I'll handle my own trouble, Elias said and walked away. That night, he sat outside on the porch long after dark, a lantern flickering beside him. The stars were bright, scattered thick across the sky, the air cool with the scent of sage. Inside, he could hear Mei Lin singing softly to Luca, a lullaby in a tongue he couldn't understand, but it filled the house with warmth all the same. For a man who'd lived years in silence, the sound was both a blessing and a curse. It made him remember how much he'd lost, and how much he stood to lose again. He dozed off in the chair, a rifle resting across his lap, until a sudden cry split the night. It came from inside. He was on his feet in an instant, bursting through the door. Mei Lin was sitting up, breathing fast, sweat on her forehead. The lamp cast trembling light across her face. Bad dream, she whispered. I see them again. The men. They hurt me. Elias knelt beside her, unsure what to do with his hands. Ain't no one gonna touch you again, you hear? You're safe here. Her eyes glistened. You cannot watch always. I'll damn well try. She stared at him, her breath shuddering, then nodded slowly. I believe you, she said softly, and for the first time he saw trust fully bloom in her eyes. As days rolled by, small moments began to weave between them like threads of light. Mei Lin taught him a few words in her language, how to say thank you, hello, safe. He taught her how to saddle a horse, how to mend a fence. Sometimes they shared laughter, sometimes silence, but the air between them grew warm and alive. Even the boy began to call him Pa Cowboy without thinking, a nickname that made Elias both laugh and ache. But the peace was thin as glass. Late one afternoon, as Elias was fixing the gate, he noticed the cattle restless near the far edge of the property. When he rode out to check, he found fresh tracks in the mud. Horse prints, 5 or 6 of them recent. They led toward the creek where he'd first found Mei Lin and Luca. His chest tightened. He followed the trail until the light began to fade. Near the ridge, he spotted it, a piece of torn cloth caught on a bush. Black, dirty, familiar. One of the Briggs brothers wore a coat like that. He rode home fast, heart-hammering. By the time he reached the ranch, the sky was bleeding red with sunset. Mei Lin was on the porch, holding Luca close. She saw his face and knew. "They come?" she asked. "Not yet," he said, climbing down, "but they're close." That night he kept his rifle beside him and the lantern burning low. He didn't sleep. Every creak of the wind set his nerves on edge. Near midnight he heard something, distant hooves, slow and deliberate. He stepped outside, the air cold enough to bite. Across the valley, barely visible, lanterns flickered between the trees. 4, maybe 5 riders. Watching. Waiting. He lifted the rifle and fired once into the air. The sound thundered across the land. The lights wavered, then vanished into the dark. Mei Lin appeared at the doorway, pale. "They go?" For now, she hesitated, then stepped closer. The moonlight touched her face, soft and fragile. "Why you do this?" she whispered. "Risk for us?" He looked at her, and for a long time he didn't answer. Then, quietly, "Because I ain't gonna stand by while the world eats good people alive." Her eyes searched his face, and something broke open in her expression, a mix of gratitude and pain. She reached out, her fingers brushing his arm. "You good man," she said, "but world not kind to good men." He caught her hand before she pulled away. "Then, let it come for me first." She didn't speak after that. She just looked at him, eyes shimmering with unspoken words, then turned and went back inside. When dawn came, Elias found her in the kitchen, making tea. She moved gracefully, quietly, as if the night had never happened. But when their eyes met, something lingered between them, something neither could name. The next few days brought a strange calm. The riders didn't return, and for a while it almost felt normal again. Luca helped Elias mend fences. Mei Lin tended to her small garden, humming while she worked. But beneath the peace, tension coiled tight, waiting. The breaking point came a week later. Elias had ridden into town again, this time for fencing wire. As he walked past the saloon, he heard laughter, ugly, familiar. The Briggs brothers. He stopped. There were 3 of them at the bar, rough men with cruel smiles and eyes like glass. One noticed him and smirked. "Well, look who it is." "The rancher play-in, house with that China girl." The others laughed. Elias's hand clenched around the edge of the bar. "Watch your mouth," he said. The first man stood, swaggering closer. "Or what? You gonna shoot me for talking? Ain't no law against truth?" Elias didn't move, but his stare was sharp enough to cut. "You keep her name out of your filthy mouth." The man grinned. "She screams pretty, don't she? I remember that night." The punch landed before he finished. The room exploded into chaos. Chairs crashed, glass shattered, men shouted. Elias fought like a man with nothing left to lose. When the sheriff burst in, 2 of the Briggs boys were on the floor, one bleeding from his lip, another clutching his jaw. "Enough!" the sheriff barked, pulling Elias back. "You're done!" Elias didn't resist. His breathing came hard, his knuckles raw. The sheriff glared at him. "You just made yourself a target, Turner. You know that?" "Already was," Elias said, and walked out. By the time he got home, blood still dried on his shirt. The sun was gone. Mei Lin met him at the door, worry written across her face. "You fight," she said quietly. "Why?" He set the rifle aside, voice low, "Because some men don't learn any other way." She reached for his hand, her touch gentle against his bruised knuckles. "Violence make more pain," she whispered. "But sometimes I understand." He looked at her then, and the world seemed to slow. The firelight painted her face gold, her eyes dark and deep. His breath caught. She didn't look away. And in that stillness, something wordless passed between them, something tender, something forbidden. He broke the gaze first, stepping back. "You should rest," he said, his voice unsteady. But long after she'd gone to bed, he sat by the fire, staring into the flames. Outside, the wind rose, whispering across the plains. The sound carried a warning. He knew this peace wouldn't last. Men like the Briggs brothers didn't forget. And when they came next time, it wouldn't be to talk. The wind had turned strange that evening, sharp and restless, stirring the dust along the porch boards as if the earth itself felt uneasy. Hollow Creek lay wrapped in the red light of sunset, the sky heavy with clouds the color of dried blood. Elias Turner stood by the corral, hammering the last nail into a fence post, but his thoughts were elsewhere. The fight in town had left its mark, his knuckles still split, his ribs aching with every breath, but that wasn't what unsettled him. It was the silence that followed, the kind of silence that comes before bad things. Mei Lin was in the yard, hanging laundry on the line, the boy chasing a dog through the grass. The scene should have been peaceful, but Elias's eyes kept flicking to the ridge beyond the creek. He'd been watching it for days now, ever since he found those tracks. Men were out there, waiting. He could feel them in his bones. He set the hammer down, glancing toward the horizon. The light was dying fast, and the air carried the faint smell of smoke. Not wood smoke, but something else, distant, bitter. A warning. "Mei Lin," he called, voice low. "Bring the boy inside. Lock the door." She looked up from the laundry, frowning. "What happened?" "Just do it." Her face tightened, but she obeyed. He watched as she herded Luca toward the cabin, then turned and walked to the barn, checking the rifle by the door. The wind picked up again, carrying the sound of horses. Faint at first, then clearer. 5 of them, maybe 6. By the time the riders appeared on the ridge, the sky had gone dark. Their lanterns bobbed in the distance like small, hateful stars. Elias stood in the yard, rifle in hand, his jaw set. The men rode closer, slow and deliberate, their laughter drifting through the cold air. "Well, well," one called out, voice thick with whiskey. "Ain't this cozy?" "Heard you're keepin' a Chinawoman out here, Turner. Thought we'd pay our respects." Elias didn't move. "You boys turn around and ride back the way you came. You don't belong here." The leader, a broad man with a scar across his cheek, one of the Briggs brothers, spat into the dirt. "You think you get to tell us what belongs here? She's filth, Turner. You know it. Everyone in town knows it." Elias lifted the rifle a fraction. "I said leave." The man laughed, and the others joined in. "You gone soft, old man. Protectin' her like she's some kind of lady. Maybe she gives you more than gratitude, huh?" The words hit like a lash, but Elias didn't answer. The rage burned clean and cold inside him. He aimed the rifle and fired once, the bullet striking the ground inches from the man's horse. The animal reared, and the riders cursed. "That's your only warning," Elias said. "Next one goes through your chest." The leader glared at him, then grinned slowly. "We'll see about that." He wheeled his horse around. "Burn him out, boys!" They scattered, circling the ranch. Elias ran for the barn, shouting over his shoulder, "Mei Lin, get down! Take the boy!" He barely reached the door before the first torch flew. It hit the side of the barn, bursting into flame. The dry wood caught fast, the fire climbing quick as a hungry beast. The horses inside screamed. Elias yanked the doors open, slapping reins, driving the terrified animals out into the open. Heat rolled against his face, smoke clawing his throat. The attackers whooped and shouted, their torches arcing through the air, landing on the fence, the roof, the hay pile. Fire bloomed everywhere. The night glowed orange and furious. Mei Lin appeared at the doorway of the cabin, clutching Luca. "Hey, Elias!" she cried, voice raw. "Stay inside!" he roared. "Don't you move!" She hesitated, torn between fear and instinct, then ducked back in, pulling the boy with her. Elias turned back just in time to see one of the men dismount, a pistol gleaming in his hand. Elias fired first. The man dropped where he stood. Another shot rang out, splintering the fence near his shoulder. Elias ducked behind a water trough, loading fast, sweat and ash mixing on his skin. The flames roared higher, painting the world in shifting gold and black. He caught movement near the porch, one of the Briggs brothers creeping toward the cabin. Mei Lin was inside, unarmed except for the kitchen knife. Elias's heart slammed against his ribs. He stood, aimed, and fired. The man went down hard, his torch rolling across the dirt, sending sparks flying. Inside the cabin, Mei Lin was shaking. Luca clung to her waist, crying. The heat outside pressed against the walls, the windows glowing with reflected fire. "Mama, I'm scared." She pulled him close. "No cry." "Be brave, my heart." She whispered something in Chinese, her voice trembling but strong. Outside, Elias reloaded, firing again, but the men were too many. 2 horses galloped past, their riders throwing more torches. Flames caught the roof of the house now, licking up the dry shingles. Smoke poured through the cracks. Mei Lin looked up, coughing. The fire had reached the porch. She grabbed a blanket, soaked it with the little water left in the basin, and wrapped it around Luca. "We go now," she said, dragging him toward the back door. When Elias saw them emerge through the smoke, relief hit like a wave. He ran to them, taking the boy into his arms. "Stay behind me." They stumbled toward the corral, the ground burning underfoot. One of the attackers charged from the side, swinging a rifle like a club. Elias turned just in time, the weapon slamming into his shoulder. Pain exploded through him, but he held on, shoving the man back and firing point blank. The recoil nearly knocked him down. The fire had spread everywhere now. The barn was a pillar of flame, the house collapsing in on itself. The attackers began to retreat, their courage burning out as the sheriff's whistle echoed faintly from the distance. Someone had seen the blaze from town. Elias staggered, breathing hard. Mei Lin caught him as he fell to one knee, her hands gripping his arm. "You hurt," she gasped. Just a graze," he lied. Blood trickled down his side, dark against the firelight. She tore a strip from her skirt and pressed it to the wound. "You save us again," she whispered. "Why?" He looked at her, his voice hoarse. "Because I couldn't lose another family." Her eyes filled with tears, the fire reflecting in them like stars. "We are family?" she asked softly. He didn't answer, but his hand found hers, gripping it tight. The sheriff and his men arrived moments later, shouting, firing into the air. The remaining riders fled into the hills, leaving chaos in their wake. The flames devoured what was left of the barn, sparks rising into the night like souls escaping. When the fire finally died, Hollow Creek Ranch was a blackened skeleton against the dawn. Elias sat on the ground, arm around Mei Lin and Luca, his body shaking with exhaustion. The boy was silent now, his small hands gripping Elias's coat. Mei Lin leaned against his shoulder, her face streaked with ash and tears. The sheriff approached slowly. "You all right, Turner?" Elias looked up, eyes hollow. "We're alive." Harlan surveyed the ruin. "Briggs' boys are gone. You killed one. Others'll scatter, but they'll be back if the law don't find 'em first." Elias nodded faintly. "Then I'll be waiting," the sheriff sighed, tipping his hat. "You're a damn fool, but you did right." He walked away, barking orders to his men. As the sun climbed, light spilled over the wreckage. The flames were gone, but their memory lingered, curling smoke into the pale sky. Mei Lin knelt beside the ashes of what had been their home, picking up a small blackened shape. It was Luca's wooden horse, half burned, but still whole enough to recognize. She brushed the soot away and handed it to the boy. He looked at it, then at Elias. "Papa Cowboy," he whispered. Elias's throat tightened. He placed a hand on the boy's head, the weight of everything he'd lost, and found pressing against his chest. They had nothing left. No house, no barn, only the open land and each other. But somehow, that felt enough. As the sun rose over Hollow Creek, the 3 of them stood together in the light, smoke curling around them, hearts still beating. The fire had taken nearly everything. But it had also given something back, something unspoken, unbreakable. It had forged them into a family. Morning crept slow and pale across the burned fields of Hollow Creek. The wind carried the scent of ash and wet earth, the ghosts of smoke still lingering over the blackened bones of the ranch. Elias Turner stood where the barn had been, boots sinking into soot. Every breath drew the taste of loss. The sky was wide, the kind of wide that humbles a man, streaked with gold at the horizon. The land looked dead, but it wasn't. He'd seen grass push through fire before. It always came back. Behind him, the small shelter they'd built from what scraps remained crouched beside the corral. The horses grazed quietly in the distance. Luca was feeding one a handful of grain, talking softly, as if nothing had changed. Children had a way of believing the world could fix itself. Mei Lin stepped out of the shelter, her hair pulled back, wearing one of Elias's shirts cinched at the waist with a rope. The bruises had faded, but she moved carefully still, the way people do when pain hides beneath the skin. She carried a pot of boiled coffee, poured him a cup, and handed it without a word. He took it, nodding thanks. Their hands brushed, brief and warm. "You not sleep?" she said quietly. He shook his head. "Land don't fix itself. Needs lookin' after." She gazed out over the black fields. "It will live again." He watched the sunlight catch her profile. "So will we," she smiled faintly, setting the pot down on the step. "You sound like hope." "Maybe that's what this place needs," he said. The next days bled together in sweat and silence. They worked from dawn to dusk, hauling charred beams, cutting new posts, clearing what the fire had spared. Elias's muscles burned with every lift, but he didn't slow. The work gave him something to hold on to. Mei Lin helped where she could, her small frame strong and steady. When the weight grew too heavy, she would hum softly, the same melody she sang to Luca at night. The sound eased him more than he'd ever admit. One afternoon, while he repaired the fence, she came to him carrying a wooden box she'd found in the wreckage. Inside were pieces of porcelain, half melted by the fire, a teacup, a small plate, a chipped spoon. She set them down on the fence post gently, as though they were holy things. "They still beautiful," she said. Elias glanced at the ruins of the house. "You see beauty in ashes?" She nodded. "Ashes feed the earth. Without fire, new life not come." He looked at her then, really looked. The woman who had arrived at his door beaten and afraid, now stood unbroken, sunlight on her skin, eyes calm as deep water. He didn't say anything, but something shifted inside him, quiet and sure. When the heat of summer rose, they rebuilt the cabin, not as it was before, but stronger. Stone base, wide porch, the walls thick and hand-cut. Luca carried nails in a tin pail, handing them up to Elias with pride. "Papa Cowboy build big house," he declared, his small face smudged with dirt. Elias laughed, the sound startling even himself. "We're building it together, boy." At night, they sat around the fire outside. The stars returned, fierce and bright. Mei Lin would brew tea in the blackened kettle, the scent of herbs floating on the air. She taught Elias a few more words in her tongue. Peace, family, forever. He stumbled through the sounds, his accent clumsy, and she laughed softly, the sound like wind through chimes. One night, when the air was cool and the prairie whispered under the moon, she spoke of her husband for the first time. "He die working for dream," she said, her voice small. "We think West give new start, but West take much." Elias poked at the fire with a stick. "It takes what it wants, always has." She looked at him, her eyes glinting. "But I give you too. It give us you." The words hit him like a spark. He didn't know how to answer. She looked back to the fire before he could speak. Maybe West not cruel, maybe it just test too strong enough to stay. Days turned into weeks. The land began to heal. Green shoots pushing through black soil. The river running clear again. The smell of grass replaced smoke. People from town started to visit. Curiosity first, then shame when they saw the ruin and the work being done. Mrs. Tanner from the church brought bread. Even Tom Braddock, the storekeeper, came with nails and flour, muttering apologies he couldn't quite say aloud. Word had spread of what Elias did that night, how he'd stood against 6 men to protect the woman and her boy. The town's hate began to turn to awe. But Elias didn't care for their approval. His world had narrowed to the small circle of land where Mei Lin's laughter lived. Late one evening, as the sun sank, he found her sitting on the porch steps, Luca asleep against her lap. The wind moved gently through the grass, carrying the scent of rain. He sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders brushed. "You think we can stay?" she asked. "We already are," he said. She smiled, watching the horizon. "You speak like men who believe in forever." "Maybe I do," he murmured. They sat in silence, the warmth of their shoulders touching. When she leaned her head against him, he didn't move away. His hand found hers, and she let him hold it. No vows, no promises. Just the quiet knowing between them. Autumn came early that year. The sky turned wider, the nights cooler. The cabin stood finished, a small garden blooming behind it. The cherry blossom sapling Elias had planted near the porch took root, its tiny branches trembling in the wind. One afternoon, as Mei Lin hung laundry, she paused, her hands resting on her belly. She called softly, "Elias!" He came from the barn, wiping sweat from his brow. "What is it?" She looked at him, eyes bright with something new. "I think I carry new life." For a moment, he didn't speak. The world seemed to tilt, the sounds of the ranch fading. Then his breath caught, and he smiled, a slow, trembling smile that reached his eyes. "You sure?" She nodded, tears glinting. "Yes, I feel it." He crossed to her, his hands rough and careful as he touched her cheek. "Then this land's blessed after all," he said softly. That night they sat by the fire, closer than before. She rested her head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat. "I'm afraid," she whispered. "Of what?" "Of losing again." He wrapped his arm around her. "We've both lost enough. This time, we keep it." Under the stars, he kissed her. Slow, gentle, a promise made without words. The wind rose, carrying the scent of sage and smoke and something sweeter. For the first time in 15 years, Elias Turner felt whole. Winter came with frost, white and silent. The ranch slept under snow, smoke curling from the new chimney. Inside, laughter filled the rooms. Luca raced through the house with a wooden horse in hand, shouting cowboy songs. Mei Lin sat by the fire, her belly round, sewing a blanket. Elias carved a small cradle from pine wood, his rough hands shaping it smooth. When she went into labor on a night thick with snow, he stayed by her side, holding her hand through every cry, every breath. Dawn broke as a baby's cry filled the cabin. A daughter, small and fierce, her skin soft as new snow. Mei Lin cradled her, tears shining in her eyes. "She's strong," she whispered. "Like her father." Elias looked at the tiny face, his heart breaking open. "Like her mother," he said. Spring returned, and with it the land bloomed wild. The cherry blossom tree by the porch burst into pale pink flowers. People from town rode out again, not to gossip, but to help raise new fences, to share food, to welcome the baby the way small towns do when shame has turned to pride. Elias never said much. He didn't need to. The ranch spoke for him, the laughter in the yard, the smoke curling from the chimney, the footprints in the dust where 3 lives had become one. Sometimes, at sunset, he would stand by the fence and watch Mei Lin walk through the tall grass, the baby in her arms, Luca chasing after her. The sight always stopped his breath. He thought of the night she'd come to him. Rain, fear, the boy's small voice saying, "They've beaten my mama, she is dying." He thought of all the pain that had followed, and all the love that had grown from it. Now the same land that once took everything from him had given him everything back. As the sun dipped low, Mei Lin joined him by the fence. She placed her hand on his, her touch light. "You remember when I say ashes feed earth?" He nodded. She smiled. "Now you see?" He looked at her, the light of dusk painting her face gold. "Yeah," he whispered. "Now I see." They stood together, watching the last light fade, the cherry blossoms trembling in the wind. The baby stirred softly in her arms, and Luca's laughter drifted across the yard. Elias Turner closed his eyes, breathing deep. For the first time since he could remember, the air didn't taste like loss. It tasted like home. And in the heart of the Wild West, where dust met dawn and pain met grace. Love, against all odds, had risen from the ashes. In the vast silence of the frontier, where grief and fire once ruled the night, Elias Turner learned that love is not born from comfort, but from courage, the kind that dares to heal, to forgive, and to begin again. From the ashes of loss, a new family rose, proving that even in the harshest corners of the Wild West, the heart can still find its home. If you were moved by this story of love, redemption, and second chances beneath the wide western skies, don't forget to subscribe to the Wild West Love Chronicles channel, where every tale rides deep into the soul, filled with passion, heartache, and the timeless power of love. Hit that bell so you don't miss the next unforgettable story from the frontier.